Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your in-depth look at how news from around the world impacts Taiwan. I'm Sally Jensen. For many countries, working with China has been a long-standing debate. In the US, society and politicians are divided on whether or not to try to warm relations with its rival superpower or to keep it at arm's length. And with top US officials paying visits to Beijing, the debate has reached the environmental sphere too. To better understand China's role in our global climate, I spoke to Pierre-Antoine Donnet, a French author and journalist. He's written a book titled China the Super Predator, A Challenge for the Planet. He began by discussing the major environmental and climate issues that China is facing.
One is the pollution of the air, and it became very, very serious in the big cities, especially in Beijing, for example. When we were there, during the winter, the sky was almost blue all the time. But then, starting about 20 years ago, the sky was never blue any time. And the population was very angry. And so there were social unrest, quite seriously. And that forced the leadership to envision a change in their policy on the climate. And then they started some measures to try to control that. And then also there are other problems, for example, pollution of the rivers, pollution of the soil. This is also very serious. So then it came to a point where the Chinese leadership had to make a distinction between economic growth and the consequences. So they tried to find a middle way until recently. And then after the zero COVID policy, which was a disaster for China, now the priority is again economic growth, and that's on the back of controlling the pollution.
Right, so you mentioned that there was some widespread social unrest. Can you tell us a bit more about perhaps the environmental movement in China? How were people experiencing these environmental problems, and what were they doing about it?
The thing is that demonstrations are forbidden in China, and organizing let's say, movements is also very much controlled. But the social unrest were coming from villages, small cities, from peasants who had their land confiscated or polluted, and also cancer rates are climbing very rapidly. So despite having any organizations, social unrest came everywhere.
How do you see, is China preparing for more crises like this, and how do you see it facing up to these?
You see, back a few years ago, Xi Jinping at the General Assembly of the UN in New York promised that there will be a neutral carbon level by 2060. The aim was to show China as a reasonable country, playing its responsibilities on the international scene, but this has been betrayed totally. And now the priority is again economic growth. And starting about 2 years ago, now they are building coal plants everywhere by hundreds. The tragic thing is that China is also now building coal plants abroad in developing countries by hundreds. So actually they have their own responsibility of emitting this pollution on the atmosphere from China and also from other countries where they are building these plants.
And on the point of China's carbon neutrality goal by 2060, how likely do you think it is that China will achieve this goal?
No way, actually. Really no way. Again, when you see the economic situation, the economic growth is going down. It has been going down to a point where it has been never seen since 1978. There are social problems coming out of that situation. So it's a challenge for the CCP. So for the CCP now, the priority is controlling the situation, politically speaking, but also doing everything that can be done inside China to restart the economic growth on the expenses of the ecological system. So just to say, the promise from Xi Jinping has been betrayed.
And part of that economic growth for China is the tech industry.
Yes.
How do you see the tech industry facing up to more environmental and climate disasters?
Well, tech industry means also electricity. So producing electricity, the parts of the production of electricity coming from the coal plants, the mix is still very much around 80% coming from that. The rest of it is slowly the nuclear plants, and the priority is also being focusing on that. So in 2030, China will be the biggest country in the world in terms of nuclear energy. So this is here to stay. They have a strong will to continue building nuclear plants, but they come from nowhere, so they need some time. So the mix is still there. So now the renewable energy is still minimal. In the mix, it's less than 10%, but also they try to do more. So that must be said, that they are trying a lot. They are putting lots of efforts on renewable energy, but this also takes time. So the present situation is, just like I said, the immediate future is quite bleak.
And many countries around the world are pledging similar goals of reaching carbon neutrality or net zero. So Pierre-Antoine, I want to zoom out next and ask you whether China is working with other countries on climate and environmental issues. But first, let's take a look at this report. California Governor Gavin Newsom says he wants to strengthen relations with China to work on climate issues. Kicking off his week-long visit on Monday, the leader of the United States' richest state is expected to sign climate agreements with heads of Chinese provinces. The political relationship between Washington and Beijing has deteriorated in recent years. Climate remains one area where collaboration between the superpowers is seen as possible. China is the world's biggest greenhouse gas emitter, as well as the largest producer of renewable energy.
We're not going to move the needle on climate change unless the United States and China collaborate together.
So Pierre-Antoine, we just saw that more leaders from abroad are visiting China and hoping to work with China on these issues. Does this indicate that China is open to working with other countries on climate and environment issues?
So, you have two different faces. The official face, which is to seduce, to show China as the good guy. And the non-official face is to do money and, to take advantages of how the West is going to collaborate with China. So on the official face, when the Sino-American relations were very bad, the only sector where Washington wanted to collaborate with China was climate change. So John Kerry went there several times, and at one point the Chinese side said, no way, we have no discussion on any aspect at all. Then after some time, they started again to talk on that, because this is a crucial aspect for the whole planet. And I think the Chinese leadership realized that their image depends a lot on what they do on that. So this is why the negotiations between the US and China on climate change started again. So what's going to happen out of it is difficult to say. There will be a summit probably between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden in November in California. That has been prepared a lot. The foreign minister from China, Wang Yi, went there in Washington to discuss how to prepare that stuff, how to prepare that summit. That will be the first time the two leaders meet since their last meeting in Bali in Indonesia. So both sides attach a great importance on how this summit will go through.
Let's talk about more of these collaborations, perhaps not just with the US, but with other countries. Are there any positive examples of China working with other countries on environmental or climate issues?
Well, there was one thing I wanted to tell you is that on green energy, the collaboration with Israel, between China and Israel, was very important, because Israel has the know-how, they have the techniques, and the Chinese side was demanding that, but this has been stopped. You know why? Because of the crisis in Israel now. Other than that, to be blunt, money talks, so all the time. So whenever you have delegations visiting Beijing, climate change is far back. The priority is how to do money with China, knowing that it's becoming more and more difficult. So I'm a little bit negative, but I think we have to face the reality.
Can you tell us about how China is working in the sea as well, perhaps its fisheries industry and what it's doing there?
Yes. Well, the fishery is an aspect where also China appeared to be really destroying the reserves, international seas, everywhere. It has been shown how these enormous boats go everywhere in the world, including Latin America, where in some zones which are supposed to be protected. So that also had consequences on the image of China. Now the big question is today, in this very difficult world that we are in, where is the priority for the Chinese leadership? Is this their image abroad, or is this their international stability? Personally speaking, I think that for them, especially for the President Xi Jinping, the biggest priority is, as he says, social and political stability. So the image abroad of China is of course important for them, but it's not the priority.
But do you think that is China really the worst player in a world where so many countries are failing to meet their climate and
it's
environmental
just a question
targets?
of numbers. They are the worst player because they are the biggest population now after India, but there are still 1.4 billion people. So the impact on the planet is immense. So this is why.
Is that perhaps because many other countries are purchasing from China? Is there a kind of contradiction in the way that some other governments perhaps are, saying that China needs to step up, but at the same time?
Yeah, I will answer you in a slightly different opinion or angle. We, the West, we have a responsibility on that because actually it's we Westerners asked China to produce for us, all sorts of items. So we have an indirect responsibility on the pollution created in China because of us. So let's blame the Chinese, but also let's blame us.
And what can we do about this?
Yes, exactly.
Do you have an answer?
Well, I'm sure you agree with me, but anyway, climate change is the number one issue for all of us in the planet. So we should spare no effort to convince the Chinese leadership, but also the next generation to work together. I think foreign leaders should continue to talk to China as much as possible. When talking to Mr. Xi Jinping, they must have in mind that they are talking to the people after him, to the generation after him and his leadership. And the message should be that, because he is now 70 years old. He may be here for another 10 years, who knows, maybe more, maybe less. But he's not eternal. So after him, there will be a change. There are the young people and the young Chinese. They have ways to communicate with the outside world to some extent. So talking to him, they are talking to the new generation who knows a lot about the outside world. So this is, I think, the future of China.
Thank you so much, Pierre-Antoine. It's been great having your insight on the show.
Thank you so much.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. You can find more stories from TaiwanPlus by following us on social media. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.